It's Hoa Hoa season, so for this episode of Hot Stuff, I want to try to make a Twilight-inspired wine glass. For the inspiration for this piece, I want to focus on the book covers, so I want to feature the hands with the apple, the little white chess piece, and the flower. And then somehow mash all those bits together to make it into a beautiful, elegant wine glass. So let's go design it. So I've already got a pretty clear idea of what I would like my design to look like. I've obviously got my three elements and I want a dark foot and a bowl to put it all together. This is hopefully to get that dark element of the black book covers. As flowers go upward, I figure at the top of the neck would look best, followed by the chest piece and then the stamp of the apple. So this is the very first sketch. I've got all my elements in here and I think this looks really pretty. The colours also seem to be quite striking whilst working really well together. However, I have concerns of it perhaps maybe tipping. We've also got this flared out bottom of the chest piece, which is then in the middle of the goblet. So it might in fact be better to put the chest piece a little further down so it's more in line with the bottom of the foot, and this way it's maybe not going to tip over. So the stamp can easily be moved to the top, and then the chest piece and the foot and all that counterbalance can sit nicely at the bottom. Once I've actually made all these elements, this design may change again, so we'll see how we go. Next is my favourite part. It's time to pick out the glass colours for this project. And to start, I'm going to pick out the colours for my white chest piece. So I'm going to use semi and opaque white for this, and I'm going to put in some clear as well to get a nice marbling effect. This will hopefully turn these quite basic colours into something a bit more opulent. I'm also going to use these same whites for my petals. For my petals, I am also going to need some red glass, and for this, I think I'm going to use some frit. This is the only red frit I actually have, so I really hope that this works for the design. I'm hoping I'll be able to layer it up gradually to get the richness that I need. Next is looking for a stem colour for the flower, and there are lots of bright vivid greens here, but I need something actually that forks bleakness, and this is it. The filter that's on the entire movies is this really bluish kind of colour, so a green that matches that I think is going to be very important to make this a Twilight goblet. Next, I'm going to need some white tube to make the petals themselves, and this matches that chest colour we picked out earlier. I'm going for a thin medium wall tube, which will hopefully give me the right size of flowers I need for this. Lastly, I'm going to need a really heavy matte opaque black tube for my foot and for my bowl. And luckily I've got just the thing in stock to make this. This thing is huge and weighs quite a lot. And apparently black glass is notoriously difficult to work with due to its combination of metal oxides in the glass, which makes it very stiff and difficult to heat. So this will be a really interesting challenge. And to make this, I'm actually going to have to learn some new techniques in order to get the design that I want. So I'm going to move over to my skill tree and see what I need to do. While designing this, I knew I was going to be pushing my limits. There are certain skills I've already learned and can do, but there are going to be new things that I'm going to need to learn. So here I'm doing my hollow sculptural techniques, and I'm going to learn how to cut tube to make the petals. This technique is part of my lamp working book, and it gives me full instructions on exactly how to do this. The other tool I want to try to learn is CNC tool making to make a brass stamp. And this is going to be perfect for incorporating my red apple. I also have my project here to learn from. I'll have my instructions on my desk, and I've got my design. So let's create it. It is day one, and today I'm focusing on making my chest piece and starting on my glass petals. The chest piece I'm making from solid sculpted glass, and I'm using this marbling technique to get a little bit of texture in there. This will hopefully make the design a little less flat and just give it a bit of added something. This is how the test marbling came out, and I was delighted with this. So I'm going to continue this throughout the whole chest piece. I've now made the bottom half, which is looking delightful, and it's just the right size for a wine glass stem. Next, I'm adding the detail onto the top, and this is where the bowl is actually going to connect, so this needs to be nice and strong. If there are any cracks in it at all, it could make the whole thing break in half. But I made this one first time without any complications. I put it into the annealer, and here is the finished chest piece. So we are off to a very good start with this project, and this now is going to let me know how big all the other elements need to be in comparison to this. Next, I am moving on to my glass petals. This is my very first time attempting this, and I'm trying out this coloured frit. However, I already noticed that the tone of this is way too warm. It's almost quite orangey, so I'm going to need to come up with a different way of getting a more bluish kind of red in there. Now we're on day 2, and today I'm going to be refining those petals, which means I'm going to be making my own frit from scratch. Looking at the petals I made yesterday, they're definitely not saturated enough, and even the white is actually a little subdued. I need these colours to be a lot more striking and a lot more poppy. I have a lot more of a blood red in rod form, which comparing to the photo looks way better, so I'm going to turn this into frit. And hopefully putting this against a much stronger opaque white will do the trick. So I got my blood red in rod form, and to turn this into frit, I'm going to go over to this side of the studio and use this pulverizer. It's basically just a potato masher, so I'm just going to cut this to size. This should do for the amount of petals that I actually need, and then I'm going to crush this up and smash it to pieces. This also gives me great control as if I want coarse frit versus very fine, I just smash it up more or less. But of course this is dangerous, so I'm going to be wearing my mask for this to protect my eyes and not inhale any of the glass dust. So once I put this on, I then just give it a good old smash, and I'm wanting quite a lot of finer frit as well as coarse, so I'm just kind of giving it a good welly to see how it comes out. This process literally takes about 30 seconds, and then I was ready to pour it out and see how it looks. And considering this was my first try, I was delighted with how it came out. It was just perfect for my petals. And I've started out with a very small amount. I can always make more of it later on, but this is really great, and now I can give it another bash. Get it? I used this on top of an opaque white tube, and this was the result. This is straight out the kiln, but I can already tell that this is far more saturated. The shape of the petals are also getting better as I'm practicing this more and more. There were quite a few dud petals that didn't quite make it, but I think in total I made maybe about 10, and there were quite a few that I was very happy to use. It was lovely learning from my book and actually picking this up relatively quickly. And this was probably not the easiest flower to begin with trying to make. There's lots of texture in these and the colours are very odd. I also needed to figure out how I was actually going to turn this into a flower and how they were all going to attach, as I couldn't really see what the centre of the flower looked like. So I'm improvising here a little bit by making the centre bud part, and this is how it came out, and I've done it in the same colours with the same sort of pattern, and I think this worked really nicely. This is also made out of tube. This little centre part is hollow. So I stayed true to my learning, and I think here I've done a really good job. Now that all of my petals and my bulbs are finished, I can fuse them all together using my little Smith's torch. This gives me brilliant accuracy, and it means I can get really strong fuses in there so that they're not going to fall apart. I was also learning during this part that I could actually take my little torch and heat certain parts of the petals so that it would naturally collapse in on itself, and this was the result. Now, these are not the best parrot flower glass versions you will ever see, but these were my first attempts using this technique, so I seriously was delighted. I was really impressed. With that is the end of day 2, and so far I am acing this. Day 3 is making my brass stamp and assembling the whole piece together. Luckily, the apple design is very basic and quite simple, so putting this into brass was pretty straightforward. And this style of wax stamp used for letters works brilliantly well with molten glass. The brass material is able to withstand the really high temperatures, and you still get that lovely impression. Once the apple is nicely carved out, a wooden handle is put onto the end to make it into a pressing tool. I then use the same red that I used for my frit, and I stamp it in like this, which creates the beautiful little apple. However, this process puts a lot of stress into the glass, so it needs to immediately go into the annealer. So now I'm moving on to the foot and bowl. And I'm prepared for this not to go very well, as black glass is notoriously difficult to work with. So with that in mind, I'm starting with the foot, which in theory should be much easier, and it's a much smaller amount of glass, so if this goes wrong, I can just start again. And as this glass really doesn't seem to want to move, I'm using my flaring tool and technique for this. The glass really does need rather a lot of encouragement, so I'm trying to flare this out and flick it out as best I can. I'm also using a lot of heat for this. The glass is also kind of moving quite slowly, so I'm centering my flame right to that rim here, and I'm spinning it out as much as I can. It really didn't seem to be working at first, but once I really turned up my torch, I started to see it really move. It took a while, but my first attempt gave me a beautiful foot. Next, I'm moving on to the bowl, and now that I know how the glass moves and behaves, this actually gave me a much better understanding of how to make the bowl. I'm using a very hot flame for this, and with each little puff and each time I pull it, it was coming into the shape that I really wanted, which was this kind of Prosecco fluted shape. It does resemble a bit like an aubergine, but I'm happy. And this is the final part. It's assembly time, which is very stressful, but here we go. Now that all of the elements are made, I've actually changed my mind as to how these should go together. The chest piece will still remain in the middle, but the flowers are actually the heaviest part, so it makes more sense for these to be placed at the bottom. leaving then the stamp to be placed at the top nearest to the bowl. This way, all of the weight is at the bottom of it, making it a lot less likely to tip over. But the chess piece is still in the center where it's the nice part to hold on to. I'm now heating it all and making sure that it's standing up as straight as I can possibly get it to be. And of course, the very last element is the foot. This is also the part where it could break the most easy because all the petals are on there, and that's where I'm focusing all this heat. But I'm focusing it right at the bottom of the base of that chess piece, and we have success, and it is finished. I know I don't look it, but I am really, really happy. And I'm so desperate to take it out and have a play with it and stuff, but I'm going to let it anneal in here overnight as long as it needs to. This way, all the stress is going to be removed from the glass, and then we can take a proper look. This is my, I think, third ever goblet, so I'm ecstatic as to how well this is all going. With this week's project, I have unlocked 2 skills on my skill tree. My first achievement is from hollow sculpted techniques of cutting tubes to make petals. And I've unlocked CNC tool making of brass stamps. So I have come a very long way this week. I'm super proud. Now let's see how I did. And here it is. Here is my Twilight inspired glass goblet. First of all, the size, it's perfect. It fits in my hand so beautifully well. And it is so close how I originally designed it. And I like how even in the very beginning of this project, at the start of the week, I even said to myself that I knew that elements of this were going to change, and giving myself that flexibility just allowed me to experiment a bit. And now really seeing it properly, I love how it all sits like this. Now, one of the biggest things I needed to work on from last week was my strong attachments. And each individual part of this was attached super well. It feels really strong. I also think this project has a really good balance of elements. It looks really in proportion. However, there was one detail that I was a little bit distracted by. The stamp design is only on one side, which makes the design look like there's a front and a back. So to improve this, I think putting the apple on both sides would just really elevate it. I also could have been a little bit heavier handed with the actual design. I could have etched into the brass a little bit more to make the apple more prominent. But now I get to see how much liquid this thing actually holds. And I knew this when I was making the bowl, but this is the perfect size for like a champagne flute. So thank you so much for watching. This is episode 2 of Hot Stuff, and join me next week for my next project. And I really hope to see you then.